In a glittering London ballroom, Elena Whitmore, the ruined daughter of a convicted traitor, stood on the edge of total humiliation. Her former lover, the charming Julian Mercer, was crossing the floor with that same cruel smile that had destroyed her family. Desperate, she did the unthinkable. She walked straight up to the most dangerous man in the kingdom and asked him to dance. Duke Alexander Thornfield, the merciless Wolf Duke who had sent dozens of noble families to the gallows, looked down at her with cold gray eyes. Then he took her hand. In that single moment, Elena didn't just escape embarrassment. She stepped onto a battlefield that would shake the entire aristocracy to its core. Stay with us until the very end to see how one desperate decision rewrote the fate of two broken souls. And if you're watching from your city right now, drop a like and tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. The chandeliers of Ashford House blazed like fallen stars, casting golden light across the most exclusive ballroom in London. 700 candles flickered in crystal sconces. Silk gowns swirled across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The air thrummed with violins, champagne-soaked laughter, and the whispered secrets of the kingdom's elite. Elena Whitmore stood alone at the edge of it all, a ghost among the living. Her gown was beautiful, midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that caught the light when she moved, but it was last season's fashion, and everyone knew it. Her gloves were pristine white, but they couldn't hide the fact that her hands trembled slightly. She held her champagne glass like a shield, though she hadn't taken a single sip. Because Elena Whitmore wasn't here to celebrate, she was here to survive. "She has nerve, I'll give her that," someone murmured behind a painted fan. "The daughter of a traitor?" another voice hissed. "Showing her face at the Queen's gala. Shameless." "I heard the creditors took everything. The house, the ships, even her mother's jewelry." "Good. Her father deserved worse than prison." Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn around. She'd learned months ago that defending herself only made things worse. The whispers would follow her no matter what she did. The stares would never soften. In the eyes of London's high society, she would always be the disgraced merchant's daughter, the girl whose father had stolen crown funds and destroyed his own shipping empire in a storm of corruption. Except he hadn't. Elena knew the truth, even if no one else did. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, had been framed, set up by someone with enough power and influence to make the lies stick. But truth didn't matter in this world, not when lies came wrapped in silk and signed by judges. She lifted her chin and forced herself to breathe. Across the ballroom near the grand staircase where the aristocracy gathered like peacocks preening for attention, she saw him. Julian Mercer, tall, golden-haired, devastatingly handsome in his tailored black coat. He stood surrounded by admirers, women who laughed too loudly at his jokes, men who clapped him on the shoulder like they were sharing war stories. Julian's smile was easy, charming, the kind that made people trust him before they realized what he really was. A liar, a manipulator, a monster in a gentleman's skin. Elena's stomach twisted. She'd loved him once, believed every word he'd whispered in moonlit gardens, thought he'd seen past her merchant-class origins to the woman beneath. He'd promised her the world, kissed her like she mattered, made her feel like she belonged. And then, when her family's scandal broke, he'd been the first to turn his back. No, worse than that. Julian had stood in front of Parliament and testified against her father, claimed he'd witnessed Thomas Whitmore accepting bribes from foreign agents, swore under oath that the Whitmores were traitors to the crown. It had been the final nail in the coffin. The jury believed him. Society believed him. Even some of Elena's own relatives believed him. Her father was sentenced to 20 years in debtor's prison. Her mother had died of shame 6 months later. Their fortune was seized. Their name became poison. And Julian Mercer became a hero, the man who'd saved the kingdom from a corrupt merchant family. Elena gripped her champagne glass so hard she thought it might shatter. She shouldn't have come tonight. She knew that. But the invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, a cream-colored envelope with the royal seal. A summons she couldn't refuse without making things even worse. The Queen's annual gala wasn't optional for families with noble connections, even disgraced ones. Attendance was expected. Absence would be noticed. So Elena had sold this last piece of her mother's jewelry, a small sapphire brooch, and bought this gown. She'd arranged her dark hair into an elegant twist. She'd painted her face into a mask of calm indifference, and she'd walked into this glittering nightmare hoping to make it through one night without falling apart. But Julian was watching her now. She could feel his gaze across the ballroom like ice water down her spine. He leaned toward one of his companions and said something that made the man laugh. Then Julian straightened his cuffs, fixed that charming smile on his face, and started walking directly toward her. Panic flared in Elena's chest. No, no. No. She couldn't do this, couldn't stand there and let him humiliate her again. Couldn't listen to his false sympathy or his carefully crafted apologies that blamed her father while absolving himself. She turned sharply, searching for an escape route, a servant's corridor, a garden door, anywhere. But the crowd had shifted, blocking her path. Women in silk gowns clustered near the terrace entrance. Men in military uniforms dominated the hallway leading to the card rooms. Julian was getting closer, 20 feet away now. 15. Elena's heartbeat hammered in her ears. She had two choices: stand there and face him, or run like a coward and confirm every cruel thing society whispered about her. Neither option felt survivable. And then she saw him, the stranger. He stood near the far wall, half hidden in shadow despite the blaze of candlelight everywhere else. Tall, taller than any man in the room, with broad shoulders encased in a dark military coat that looked more like armor than formal wear. His hair was black as midnight, cut short and severe. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth set in a grim line that suggested he hadn't smiled in years. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Gray. Storm cloud gray. Cold and watchful and utterly merciless. He wasn't watching the dancers or the nobles preening for attention. He was watching the room itself, cataloging every face, every movement, like a hunter studying prey. Elena didn't recognize him. But she recognized the way people avoided him, the way conversations died when he shifted his weight, the way even the most arrogant lords gave him a wide berth, as if getting too close might prove fatal. Whoever he was dangerous. And in that moment, desperate and cornered, Elena made a choice that would change her life forever. She walked straight toward him. The crowd parted instinctively as she moved, women stepping back with wide eyes, men murmuring questions she didn't hear. Elena's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to keep going. 10 steps, 5, 3. The stranger's gaze shifted to her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His coat bore no decorations except a single silver pin at his collar, a wolf's head with ruby eyes. His gloved hands rested at his sides, perfectly still, but there was a coiled tension in his posture that suggested he could move faster than thought if he needed to. Elena stopped directly in front of him. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Will you dance with me?" The ballroom went silent, not gradually, not a slow fade of conversation. It was as if someone had cut the strings on a marionette. Every voice, every laugh, every clink of champagne glasses stopped at once. The violins faltered and went quiet. Elena felt 700 pairs of eyes lock onto her back. The stranger stared down at her, his expression unreadable. For 3 endless seconds, he didn't move, didn't speak, just studied her face like he was deciding whether she was brave or insane. Then, without a word, he extended his hand. Elena took it. His grip was firm, controlled, and cold even through the gloves. He led her onto the dance floor in absolute silence. The crowd didn't part this time. They fled, clearing a wide circle around the two of them like they were standing on cursed ground. The orchestra scrambled back to life, launching into a waltz with frantic, uneven timing. The stranger's hand settled at her waist. Elena placed her palm against his shoulder, feeling the rigid line of military muscle beneath the coat. And they began to dance. He moved with precision, each step perfectly measured, perfectly controlled. There was no warmth in it, no performance for the watching crowd, just cold, mechanical competence. Elena forced herself to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond. She tried again. "My name is... I know who you are." His voice was low, rough-edged, and colder than his eyes. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it carried no kindness either, just flat, emotionless fact. Elena swallowed. "Then you know my ex-lover is watching. and that I'd rather dance with anyone, even a stranger, than give him the satisfaction of seeing me alone. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of something bitter. You picked the wrong stranger. Why? He turned her smoothly through the next series of steps, his gaze never leaving her face. Because tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will report that Elena Whitmore, the disgraced daughter of a convicted traitor, trapped the kingdom's most dangerous man into a public display of affection. Elena's blood went cold. Who are you? The stranger's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement, if amusement could freeze bone deep. Duke Alexander Thornfield, the Wolf Duke. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. Every aristocrat in the kingdom knew the stories. Alexander Thornfield wasn't just nobility, he was the crown's weapon. A royal investigator with unlimited authority to hunt traitors, expose corruption, and destroy anyone who threatened the throne. He'd been born into one of the oldest ducal families in England, raised in a northern fortress that looked more like a prison than an estate. And he'd earned his reputation with blood. In the past 10 years, Thornfield had dismantled 17 noble houses, sent lords to the gallows, stripped families of their titles and fortunes. His investigations were ruthless, thorough, and absolute. He didn't negotiate, didn't accept bribes, didn't show mercy. They called him the Wolf Duke because he hunted his prey without hesitation and tore them apart without remorse. And Elena had just asked him to dance. Her mind raced. This was worse than Julian. Infinitely worse. At least Julian only wanted to humiliate her. Thornfield could destroy what little remained of her family's name with a single word to the crown. I'm sorry, Elena stammered. I didn't know. You'll finish the dance. It wasn't a suggestion. Thornfield's hand tightened fractionally at her waist, keeping her locked in position as the waltz continued. Running now will only make the scandal worse, he said quietly. You wanted protection from your former lover. You have it. For the next 3 minutes, Julian Mercer won't dare approach you. Elena's gaze flicked past Thornfield's shoulder. Julian stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, his charming smile replaced by something between shock and fury. The crowd around him whispered frantically, fans fluttering, eyes wide. Why are you helping me? Elena asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Thornfield's expression didn't change. I'm not helping you. I'm curious. About what? Why the daughter of a man convicted of treason would be reckless enough to publicly align herself with the investigator who destroys traitors for a living. Elena's breath caught. You think I don't think anything yet, but I will find out. The waltz reached its final crescendo. Thornfield turned her through one last spin, then released her exactly as the music ended. He stepped back and bowed. Perfectly correct. Perfectly cold. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. Then he turned and walked away, his dark coat cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk. Elena stood alone in the center of the ballroom, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Every eye in the room was on her. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Did you see? The Wolf Duke. She danced with him. What was she thinking? And across the floor, Julian Mercer stared at her with naked hatred burning in his eyes. Elena had wanted protection for one night, but she'd just painted a target on her back that the entire kingdom could see. The night didn't end with the dance. It ended 3 hours later when Elena finally escaped the ballroom and hired a carriage to take her back to the cramped boarding house where she now lived. The building smelled like boiled cabbage and desperation. Her room was on the 3rd floor. A single chamber with peeling wallpaper, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto a grimy alley. It was nothing like the mansion she'd grown up in, nothing like the life she'd lost. Elena locked the door behind her and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing her gown. Her hands shook as she unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders in a dark cascade. What had she done? She'd asked the Wolf Duke to dance, in front of the entire aristocracy, in front of Julian. It had been a desperate, reckless gamble, and it had worked for about 3 minutes. Julian hadn't approached her for the rest of the evening. No one had. They'd all kept their distance, watching her like she was a curiosity in a museum. But tomorrow Tomorrow the newspapers would print the story. The gossip columns would explode with speculation. Society would dissect every second of that waltz, every word exchanged, every glance. And Duke Alexander Thornfield would investigate her, because that's what he did. He hunted traitors, exposed lies, destroyed families. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. Her father was innocent. She knew he was. But Thornfield wouldn't believe her. No one did. The evidence was too damning, the witnesses too credible, the lies too carefully constructed, and now she'd drawn the kingdom's most dangerous investigator directly to her doorstep. Stupid. So stupid. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Elena froze. It was past midnight. No one visited the boarding house at this hour. The landlady was asleep. The other tenants kept to themselves. Another knock, firmer this time. "Miss Whitmore." A man's voice, deep, controlled, and utterly unmistakable. Elena's heart stopped. No, it wasn't possible. Thornfield couldn't be here. Not now. Not... "Open the door, Miss Whitmore. We need to talk." Elena forced herself to stand. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she crossed the small room and unlocked the door with trembling fingers. Duke Alexander Thornfield stood in the narrow hallway, still wearing his dark military coat. He looked even larger in the confined space, his broad shoulders nearly touching both walls. His gray eyes swept over her, the unpinned hair, the wrinkled gown, the cramped room visible behind her, and something flickered across his face. Not quite pity, more like cold assessment. "You followed me," Elena whispered. "Yes." "Why?" Thornfield stepped forward, forcing her to retreat into the room. He closed the door behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a cell door locking. "Because you asked me to dance for a reason," he said. "And I don't believe it was only to avoid Julian Mercer." Elena's back hit the wall. "I told you the truth. He was watching me. I panicked." "You walked across an entire ballroom, past dozens of safer options, and chose the one man in that room who could end you with a single investigation." Thornfield moved closer, and Elena realized with a start that he was studying her the same way he'd studied the ballroom, cataloging every detail, every reaction, every weakness. "So I'll ask you directly, Miss Whitmore. What are you really after?" Elena's mind raced. She could lie, deflect, play the helpless victim. But this was the Wolf Duke. He'd see through anything less than the truth. So she lifted her chin, met his cold gray eyes, and said the words that had been burning in her chest for months. "Justice." Thornfield went very still. "My father is innocent," Elena continued, her voice shaking but fierce. "He didn't steal crown funds. He didn't sell secrets to foreign agents. He was framed. And the man who destroyed him is Julian Mercer." Silence. Thornfield's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, a sharpening, like a blade being drawn. "Julian Mercer testified against your father under oath," he said quietly. "He provided evidence, witnesses, documentation. All lies." "Prove it." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "I can't. Not alone. That's why I—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Thornfield's eyes narrowed. "Why you what?" Elena took a shaky breath. "That's why I asked you to dance." Understanding dawned across Thornfield's face, cold, sharp, and dangerous. "You wanted my attention." "Yes." "You wanted to force me to investigate." "Yes." "By creating a scandal so public, so explosive that I'd have no choice but to look into your family's case." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. Thornfield stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, the corner of his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth at all. "That," he said softly, "was either the bravest or the most suicidal thing you could have done." "Which one is it?" Thornfield reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. He handed it to Elena. She unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a royal investigative warrant, signed and sealed, granting Duke Alexander Thornfield full authority to reopen the case of Thomas Whitmore, dated 3 weeks ago. Elena's breath stopped. "You were already investigating," she whispered. I've been investigating Julian Mercer's family for 6 months, Thornfield said. Your father's case is connected to something much larger, a network of corruption that reaches into Parliament, the military, and the Crown itself. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. I didn't need you to ask me to dance, Miss Whitmore, but now that you have, the entire kingdom is watching, which means I can't investigate quietly anymore. Elena's mind reeled. Then why did you accept? Why dance with me if it ruins your investigation? Thornfield's gray eyes locked onto hers. Because Julian Mercer saw you approach me. And tomorrow, when the scandal breaks, he'll panic. He'll make mistakes. Reach out to his co-conspirators. Try to cover his tracks. The Wolf Duke smiled then, a cold, predatory expression that sent ice down Elena's spine. You just became the perfect bait. The word hung in the air like poison. Bait. Elena stared at Duke Alexander Thornfield, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The small room suddenly felt impossibly smaller, the walls pressing in as the full weight of what he'd just said settled over her. You want to use me? She said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thornfield didn't flinch. Yes. To draw out Julian Mercer. And everyone connected to him. Elena's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the faded wallpaper behind her, trying to steady herself. And if they come after me? If they decide I'm too dangerous to leave alive? For the first time since entering her room, something flickered in Thornfield's gray eyes. Not quite concern, the Wolf Duke didn't seem capable of that, but acknowledgement. Then I'll make sure they fail. It wasn't comfort, it was calculation, a chess player protecting a valuable piece. Elena forced herself to breathe. Her mind raced through everything that had happened in the past few hours. The dance, the whispers. Julian's face twisted with rage across the ballroom floor. She'd wanted Thornfield's attention. She'd gotten it. But this, becoming bait in a conspiracy that reached into Parliament itself, this was so far beyond what she'd imagined that she couldn't see the edges of it. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Thornfield pulled a watch from his coat pocket, checked it, and snapped it shut with a crisp click. In approximately 6 hours, every scandal sheet in London will print the story of our dance. By noon, you'll be the most talked-about woman in the city. By evening, Julian Mercer will make contact. How do you know? Because he can't afford not to. Thornfield's mouth curved into that cold, predatory smile again. You're a threat now. The disgraced merchant's daughter who caught the attention of the kingdom's chief investigator. Julian will need to know what you told me. What I know. Whether you're working with me or against him. Elena's throat tightened. And when he contacts me? You'll tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Which is? Thornfield stepped closer. Close enough that Elena could see the fine scars on his jaw, the hard lines etched around his eyes from years of hunting men through darkness. That you hate me. That the dance was a desperate mistake. That you're terrified I'm going to destroy what's left of your family. His voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. You'll beg him for help. Play the victim. Make him believe he still has power over you. Elena's stomach turned. You want me to crawl back to the man who ruined my father. I want you to make him think he's won. And then? Then he'll get careless, reveal his connections, lead me to the people at the top of this conspiracy. Thornfield's eyes locked onto hers. Julian Mercer is a symptom, Miss Whitmore, not the disease. If I arrest him now, the real architects of this treason will disappear into the shadows and rebuild. I need them all. Elena closed her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to throw Thornfield out of her room and run as far from London as her remaining money could take her. But then she thought of her father, Thomas Whitmore, locked in a debtor's prison for crimes he didn't commit. Growing older, weaker, more broken with each passing month. Her mother, dead from the shame of a scandal built on lies. Justice. That's what she'd told Thornfield she wanted, and justice had a price. Elena opened her eyes. If I do this, if I help you, you'll clear my father's name. If the evidence supports his innocence, yes. That's not good enough. Elena pushed away from the wall, forcing steel into her voice. I want it in writing, A royal pardon, signed and sealed, the moment you have proof Julian Mercer lied under oath. Thornfield studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Agreed. He reached into his coat again and produced a second document, this one blank except for the royal seal embossed at the top. He pulled out a pen, wrote several lines in sharp, precise handwriting, and signed it. Then he handed it to Elena. She read it twice, her heart pounding. Upon presentation of evidence proving Julian Mercer committed perjury and testimony against Thomas Whitmore, Duke Alexander Thornfield hereby guarantees a full royal pardon and restoration of all seized assets to the Whitmore family. It was signed, dated, and bore Thornfield's ducal seal. This is binding? Elena whispered. On my title and my life. Elena folded the document carefully and tucked it into the bodice of her gown. The paper felt warm against her skin, like a promise and a threat all at once. Then we have an agreement, Your Grace? Thornfield's expression shifted fractionally. Not quite approval, but something close. Tomorrow morning a carriage will arrive at 8 o'clock. It will take you to Thornfield House in Mayfair. You'll move into the guest wing under the pretense of our engagement. Elena's head snapped up. Our what? Engagement. It's the only explanation society will accept for why you're living under my protection. Thornfield's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business transaction. The scandal will be significant, but manageable. Better a rushed engagement than unsanctioned cohabitation. You're asking me to pretend to marry you. I'm not asking. Elena's temper flared. You can't just... I can. And I am. Thornfield moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. This isn't a negotiation, Miss Whitmore. You asked me to dance. You drew the kingdom's eyes to both of us. Now we play the role society expects, or everything I've built toward collapses. He opened the door, and cold hallway air rushed in. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs like a countdown. Elena stood frozen in the center of her tiny room, her mind reeling, engaged to the Wolf Duke, living in Thornfield House, playing bait for a conspiracy that could get her killed. She sank onto the edge of her bed and pressed her hands over her face. What had she done? The newspapers arrived at dawn. Elena hadn't slept. She'd paced her room for hours, alternating between terror and grim determination, until pale gray light began filtering through the grimy window. The landlady's shout echoed up the stairwell. Miss Whitmore! You've got visitors! Elena's stomach dropped. It was barely 6 o'clock. The carriage wasn't supposed to arrive until 8. She threw a shawl over her shoulders and descended the creaking stairs. 3 people waited in the boarding house's cramped entryway. The first was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in impeccable black with her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She held a leather satchel and regarded Elena with the critical eye of someone assessing damaged merchandise. The second was a younger woman, barely 20, with bright eyes and a maid's uniform. The third was a massive man in military dress, clearly a bodyguard, who positioned himself by the door like he expected assassins to burst through at any moment. The older woman stepped forward. Miss Whitmore, I am Mrs. Petra Caldwell, head of household at Thornfield House. His Grace has sent me to prepare you for transport. Elena blinked. It's 6 in the morning. Yes, the scandal sheets print at dawn. By 7, every street corner in London will be discussing your dance with the Duke. We need you moved before the crowds gather. Mrs. Caldwell's tone brooked no argument. You have 30 minutes to pack your belongings. Anything you cannot carry will be sent for later. Elena wanted to protest, to demand more time, to ask 100 questions. But Mrs. Caldwell had already turned to the young maid. Lily, help Miss Whitmore with her things, and for heaven's sake, burn that gown. She can't be seen arriving at Thornfield House in last season's silk. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Lily, cheerful and efficient, helped Elena pack her few possessions into a single trunk. Everything she owned fit easily. 3 dresses, 2 pairs of shoes, her mother's hairbrush, and a small miniature portrait of her parents on their wedding day. Mrs. Caldwell produced a new traveling dress from her satchel, deep green wool with black trim, perfectly tailored and clearly expensive. His Grace's instructions, she said when Elena stared. You represent Thornfield House now. Dress accordingly. Elena changed quickly, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons. The dress fit perfectly, which meant Thornfield had somehow known her measurements. The thought made her skin crawl. How long had he been watching her? By 6:30, they were ready. The bodyguard, who never spoke, carried Elena's trunk downstairs. Mrs. Caldwell settled the remaining rent with the landlady, adding enough extra coin that the woman's eyes went wide. For your discretion, Mrs. Caldwell said coolly. Then they were outside. Dawn had broken fully now, pale and cold. A massive black carriage waited at the curb, pulled by 4 midnight dark horses. The Thornfield crest, a wolf's head with ruby eyes, gleamed on the door. Elena climbed inside with Lily's help. The interior was plush, all burgundy velvet and polished wood. Mrs. Caldwell settled across from her, while Lily and the bodyguard took the rear-facing seats. The carriage lurched into motion. Elena watched through the window as her boarding house and the last remnant of her old life disappeared behind them. "You'll want to prepare yourself," Mrs. Caldwell said, pulling a newspaper from her satchel. "The early editions are already circulating." She handed the paper to Elena. The headline screamed across the front page, "Wolf Duke dances with traitor's daughter. Shocking romance or calculated investigation?" Below it, a detailed account of the previous night's gala. Every word Elena and Thornfield had exchanged, every step of their waltz, the exact moment he'd taken her hand. The article speculated wildly. Was Thornfield investigating the Whitmores again? Had Elena seduced the kingdom's most dangerous man? Was this a secret engagement or a trap? It was worse than Elena had imagined. "They'll crucify me," she whispered. Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened fractionally. "They'll try. But you're under the Duke's protection now. No one will touch you." "You say that like it's comforting." "It should be. His Grace destroys his enemies. All of them." The carriage rolled through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods. The cramped streets of the lower city gave way to broad avenues lined with elegant townhouses. Finally, they turned onto a private drive. Thornfield House rose before them like a fortress. It was massive, 3 stories of gray stone with tall windows that reflected the morning sun like shields. Ivy crawled up the western wall. The grounds were immaculate, surrounded by iron fencing that looked more designed to keep people in than out. The carriage stopped at the front entrance. A butler appeared immediately, elderly but sharp-eyed, flanked by 2 footmen. "Welcome to Thornfield House, Miss Whitmore," he said with a precise bow. "I am Mr. Davies. His Grace is waiting for you in the study." Elena's stomach twisted. Of course he was. She followed Davies through the entrance hall, all marble floors and dark wood paneling, and down a long corridor lined with portraits of severe-looking men and women, Thornfield ancestors, no doubt. They all had the same hard eyes. Davies stopped before a heavy oak door and knocked once. "Enter." The study was exactly what Elena expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk covered in documents, maps pinned to the walls, and Thornfield himself standing by the window with his back to the door. He'd changed clothes. Now he wore simple black trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. He looked less like a duke and more like a soldier. "Close the door," he said without turning. Elena did. The click of the latch sounded final. Thornfield finally faced her. His gray eyes swept over her new dress, and he nodded once. "Better. You look like you belong here now." "I don't belong here." "You do until this is finished." He crossed to his desk and picked up a newspaper, the same edition Elena had read in the carriage. "Julian Mercer sent a message this morning. He wants to meet with you, privately, tonight." Elena's breath caught. That was fast. "He's terrified." "Good." Thornfield tossed the paper aside. "You'll accept the meeting. Tell him you need his help, that you're frightened of me, that the engagement is a trap you can't escape. And if he doesn't believe me, he will, because you're going to give him something valuable." Thornfield opened a drawer and pulled out a leather folder. He handed it to Elena. Inside were documents, shipping manifests, letters, financial records, all bearing her father's signature. Elena's hands trembled as she recognized them. These are from my father's business, from before the scandal. Forged copies, Thornfield said, with carefully planted inconsistencies. If Julian analyzes them, he'll think he's found evidence of new crimes, proof that your father was guilty after all. Elena's throat tightened. You want me to destroy my father's reputation even further. I want Julian to think he's won, that he's outsmarted both of us. Thornfield's voice was ice cold. He'll take these documents to his co-conspirators. They'll use them to discredit any investigation I launch, and in doing so, they'll expose the entire network. Elena stared at the forged papers, at her father's signature, perfectly replicated but attached to lies. If this goes wrong, if Julian doesn't take the bait, these documents will be used against my family in court. Yes. And you're willing to risk that? I'm willing to risk everything to destroy the people who are selling our kingdom's secrets to foreign powers. Thornfield moved closer, his presence overwhelming. Your father is one man, Miss Whitmore. This conspiracy has killed hundreds. Soldiers sent to die in ambushes because their positions were sold. Ships lost at sea because their routes were betrayed. If I have to sacrifice Thomas Whitmore's reputation to stop it, I will. The brutality of it took Elena's breath away. This was the Wolf Duke. Not the man who danced with her, not the investigator offering her justice. This was the weapon the crown had forged from grief and vengeance. And she'd asked him for help. Elena's hand stopped trembling. She closed the folder and met Thornfield's eyes. I'll do it, but on one condition. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you, not anymore. Elena's voice steadied. I'll give Julian these documents. I'll play the terrified victim, but when this is over, when you've caught everyone involved, you will personally tell my father the truth. That I did this to save him, that I didn't betray him. Thornfield stared at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Agreed. Elena shook it. His grip was firm, cold, and absolute. The meeting is at 8 o'clock tonight, Thornfield said, at the Rosewood Club in Kensington. It's public enough to seem safe, private enough for Julian to speak freely. You'll go alone. My men will be watching, but they won't intervene unless your life is in immediate danger. How reassuring. You wanted justice, Miss Whitmore. This is what it costs. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Mrs. Caldwell showed Elena to her rooms, a suite in the east wing with a bedroom, sitting room, and private bath. The luxury was staggering: silk curtains, a 4-poster bed, a wardrobe already filled with gowns in her size. His Grace is thorough, Mrs. Caldwell said when Elena stared at the clothes. Lily helped her bathe and dress for the evening meeting. They chose a simple gray dress, elegant but understated, nothing that would draw attention. At 7:30, Elena stood before the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like a lady again, wealthy, composed, in control. But inside she was the same terrified girl who'd walked across a ballroom floor and gambled everything on a desperate plan. A knock at the door. It's time, Mrs. Caldwell said. Elena descended to the entrance hall. Thornfield was waiting, dressed in dark evening clothes. He looked her over with that same clinical assessment. Remember, he said quietly, you're frightened, desperate. You need Julian's protection from me. I know. And if anything goes wrong, I scream. Your men come running. I know. Thornfield's jaw tightened. For just a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or doubt. But then it was gone. The carriage is waiting. The drive to Kensington took 20 minutes. Elena watched the city roll past, gas lamps flickering to life, well-dressed couples strolling toward theaters and restaurants. A normal London evening, except she was about to walk into a trap of her own making. The Rosewood Club was an elegant establishment, all mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers, a place where the wealthy met to discuss business over brandy and cigars. The doorman recognized the Thornfield crest and bowed deeply. Miss Whitmore, Lord Mercer is waiting for you in the private dining room. Elena's pulse hammered. Thank you. She walked through the club's main hall, acutely aware of eyes following her. Whispers rippled in her wake. That's her. The traitor's daughter, engaged to the Wolf Duke. The private dining room was at the back of the club, small, intimate, with a single table set for two. Julian Mercer stood when she entered. He looked exactly as she remembered. Golden hair perfectly styled, handsome face arranged into an expression of concern, expensive clothes that screamed old money and privilege, but his eyes were cold. "Elena," he said warmly, moving toward her with arms outstretched. "Thank heavens you came." Elena forced herself not to recoil as he took her hands. "Julian, I didn't know where else to turn. Sit, please." He guided her to a chair with exaggerated gentleness. "I've been so worried since the gala. That dance with Thornfield. Elena, what were you thinking?" "Here we go." Elena let tears well in her eyes. It wasn't hard. The fear was real enough. "I wasn't thinking. I was desperate. You were watching me and I panicked and I asked the first person I saw. And it happened to be the most dangerous man in England." I know. Elena covered her face with her hands. "Now he won't let me go. He's calling it an engagement. He moved me into his house. Julian, I'm terrified. He keeps asking questions about my father, about what I know, about who I've spoken to." Julian's expression shifted. Concern melted into something sharper. "What kind of questions?" "About my father's business partners, his shipping routes, who he met with before the scandal." Elena lowered her hands, letting Julian see the fear in her eyes. "I think he's investigating my family again, looking for more evidence, more crimes to pin on us." Julian leaned back in his chair, studying her. Elena held her breath. This was the moment. Either he believed her, or everything collapsed. Finally, Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "Elena, I need you to listen very carefully. Thornfield is not your friend. He's using you. And if you're not careful, he'll destroy what's left of your family." "I know, but what can I do? He has the crown's authority. You can give me something." Elena blinked. "What?" Julian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Information, documents, anything from your father's old business records that Thornfield might be looking for. If I know what evidence he has, I can help you, protect you." Elena's heart raced. The trap was working. She hesitated, letting doubt flicker across her face. I don't know if I should. Do you trust me, Elena?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena thought of her father in prison, her mother in her grave, the lies Julian had told under oath. She met his eyes and lied with every ounce of strength she had left. "Yes," Julian smiled. "Then show me what you have." Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the leather folder Thornfield had given her. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. "These are copies. From my father's office. I found them before the creditors seized everything." Julian opened the folder. His eyes scanned the documents, widening fractionally. Elena watched his face change. The hunger there. The calculation. He saw exactly what Thornfield wanted him to see. Proof. Evidence. Ammunition. "May I keep these?" Julian asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elena nodded. "Will they help?" "More than you know." Julian closed the folder and stood. "Elena, you've done the right thing. I promise you I'll make sure Thornfield can't hurt you or your family." He kissed her hand, a gesture that once made her heart flutter. Now it made her skin crawl. "Go back to Thornfield House. Act natural. Don't let him suspect anything." And then, Julian's smile was warm, charming, and completely empty. "Then I'll take care of everything." The carriage ride back to Thornfield House felt endless. Elena sat in silence, the weight of what she'd just done pressing down on her chest like stones. She'd betrayed Julian's trust, except he'd never actually trusted her. He'd seen an opportunity and taken it, just like she had. The carriage pulled up to Thornfield House at 9:30. Elena climbed out on shaking legs. Thornfield was waiting in the entrance hall, his eyes locked onto hers the moment she walked through the door. "Well?" Elena pulled off her gloves, buying herself a moment to breathe. "He took them, the documents, all of them." Something flashed across Thornfield's face. Not quite triumph, more like grim satisfaction. "Good. Did he say what he plans to do with them?" "He's going to take care of everything." Elena's voice was hollow. which means he's going to his co-conspirators tonight. Thornfield moved toward the study. Come with me. Elena followed, her exhaustion forgotten. The study had been transformed. Maps covered the walls now, marked with pins and strings connecting locations across London. A table near the window held what looked like surveillance reports. Thornfield pointed to 3 locations marked in red. Julian will go to one of these places: a townhouse in Belgravia, a warehouse near the docks, or a private club in Westminster. He glanced at Elena. My men are already in position. The moment he moves, we'll know. And then? Then we follow the trail to everyone involved. Elena sank into a chair near the desk. The adrenaline that had kept her upright all day was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. Thornfield poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed one to her. You did well tonight. Elena stared at the amber liquid. I lied to a man who destroyed my family. That's not something to celebrate. No, but it's something necessary. Is it? Elena looked up at him. You talk about justice, Your Grace, but this feels like revenge. Thornfield's expression hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Why do you hunt traitors like this? Why dedicate your entire life to destroying corrupt nobles? For a long moment, Thornfield didn't answer. He stood by the window, staring out at the darkened grounds. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Elena had ever heard it. Because 10 years ago, my younger brother was a naval officer, 19 years old, brilliant, brave, everything our family could have hoped for. Thornfield's jaw clenched. He died when his ship was ambushed by enemy forces, forces that knew exactly where to strike because someone sold our fleet's positions. Elena's breath caught. The official report called it bad luck, a tragic loss, but I knew better. Thornfield turned to face her, and for the first time Elena saw the rage burning beneath his cold exterior. I spent 2 years investigating. I found the traitor, a duke. A man my family had trusted for generations. He'd been selling military intelligence for profit. What happened to him? I destroyed him. His title, his fortune, his family, everything. Thornfield's eyes were like ice. And then I kept going, because he wasn't the only one. There were dozens of them, Miss Whitmore. Nobles selling our kingdom's secrets while soldiers died, and no one was stopping them. Elena's throat tightened. So you became the Wolf Duke? I became what was necessary. The study fell silent. Outside, church bells tolled 10 o'clock. Somewhere in London, Julian Mercer was meeting with co-conspirators, clutching forged documents that would lead Thornfield straight to them. And here, in this fortress of a house, Elena sat across from a man who'd turned himself into a weapon because grief and rage had burned away everything else. I'm sorry, she said quietly, about your brother. Thornfield's expression didn't change. Save your sympathy. We have work to do. A sharp knock at the door. Davies entered, holding a sealed message. Your Grace, from your men in the field. Thornfield tore it open. His eyes scanned the contents, and his mouth curved into that predatory smile. Julian just entered the Belgravia townhouse. 3 other men are already inside. He looked at Elena. It's time. Elena rose from her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. We're going there? Now? Not we. I am. Thornfield was already moving toward a cabinet on the far wall, pulling out weapons with practiced efficiency. 2 pistols, a knife, a leather satchel that clinked with what sounded like more ammunition. You're staying here where it's safe. Like hell I am. Thornfield spun to face her, his gray eyes blazing. This isn't a negotiation. Neither was making me bait. Elena stepped forward, refusing to back down despite every instinct screaming at her to retreat. You used me to draw Julian out. Now you want me to sit here like a helpless decoration while you finish what I started? What you started could get you killed. These men aren't playing games, Miss Whitmore. If they discover what you've done, then they'll come for me whether I'm here or there. At least if I'm with you, I'll see it coming. Thornfield's jaw clenched. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the study was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then he shoved one of the pistols across the desk toward her. Do you know how to use this? Elena stared at the weapon. It was smaller than the one Thornfield kept, but no less deadly. My father taught me. Before everything. Then take it, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, no heroics. His voice was iron. Because if you die tonight, your father never gets his pardon. Do you understand? Elena picked up the pistol. It was heavier than she remembered, cold and brutal in her palm. I understand. Thornfield grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Then let's move. We have 20 minutes before Julian realizes those documents are forgeries and this entire operation collapses. They took an unmarked carriage, no Thornfield crest, no distinctive markings. Just a plain black vehicle that could blend into any London street. The driver was one of Thornfield's men, silent and efficient, who asked no questions when the Duke gave him an address in Belgravia. Elena sat across from Thornfield in the darkness, the pistol hidden in the folds of her cloak. Through the window, she watched the city transform. Respectable neighborhoods gave way to elegant townhouses, each one a monument to wealth and privilege. It was almost midnight now. The streets were mostly empty except for the occasional carriage carrying late-night theater-goers home. The townhouse belongs to Lord Edmund Harrington, Thornfield said, his voice low. Member of Parliament, sits on the Naval Affairs Committee. On paper, he's an exemplary public servant. And in reality, he's been selling fleet positions to French agents for 3 years. Thornfield checked his pistol with mechanical precision. Julian's family has been funneling the money through dummy shipping companies. Your father's business was one of them, used without his knowledge, then destroyed when it became convenient. Elena's hands tightened around her own weapon. My father never knew. No, he was collateral damage, a convenient scapegoat. Thornfield's eyes met hers in the dim light. That's how men like Harrington operate. They sacrifice the innocent to protect themselves. The carriage slowed. They'd arrived at a quiet street lined with identical Georgian townhouses. Gas lamps cast pools of yellow light across cobblestones. Everything looked peaceful, elegant, safe. But 3 houses down, Elena could see shadows moving behind curtained windows. Thornfield opened the carriage door. Stay close. Stay quiet. And if shooting starts, get behind me. They moved through the darkness like ghosts. 2 of Thornfield's men materialized from the shadows, both armed, both wearing the same grim expression as their duke. Report, Thornfield said quietly. The taller man spoke in a whisper. 4 men inside. Mercer arrived 15 minutes ago with the documents. They're in the study on the 2nd floor, arguing. About what? Can't tell. Windows are too thick. The man hesitated. Your Grace, there's something else. A 5th person arrived 10 minutes ago, came in through the servants' entrance. We couldn't get a clear look. Thornfield's expression darkened. Show me. They circled to the back of the townhouse, moving through a narrow alley that reeked of garbage and coal smoke. The servants' entrance was a plain wooden door currently unguarded. Too easy, Elena thought. Something about this felt wrong. Thornfield picked the lock in under 30 seconds. The door swung open silently, revealing a dim servants' corridor. They slipped inside. The house was elegant even in its back halls. Polished floors, expensive wallpaper, the scent of beeswax and old money. Voices drifted from upstairs, muffled but urgent. Thornfield moved toward the main staircase with Elena right behind him. Every step felt like walking on ice. One wrong move and everything would shatter. They reached the 2nd floor landing. The study door was ajar, spilling light and voices into the hallway. Telling you, these documents are legitimate, Julian's voice, sharp with frustration. I got them directly from Elena. She has no idea what they mean. Then she's more useful than we thought. A deeper voice, cultured and cold. Lord Harrington, Elena guessed. But Thornfield isn't a fool. If he's investigating the Whitmore case again, he's not investigating. He's infatuated. Julian's laugh was bitter. The great wolf Duke, caught in his own trap. He thinks he's using Elena to get to us, but she's feeding us everything he knows. Elena's stomach turned. Julian truly believed she'd betrayed Thornfield, that she was still his. Another voice cut in, older, rougher. I don't like it. Thornfield doesn't get infatuated. He gets results. Which is why we need to act now, Harrington said, before he realizes what we're doing. Silence. Then Julian spoke again, quieter this time. The shipment arrives Tuesday. French gold in exchange for the Atlantic Fleet's winter positions. If we can complete this transaction, we'll have enough money to disappear. New identities, new lives. And Thornfield? We'll be chasing ghosts by the time he figures it out. Thornfield's hand moved to his pistol. He glanced at Elena, his expression unreadable, then gestured for his men to take positions on either side of the door. This was it. The moment everything either worked or fell apart. Thornfield kicked the door open. "Nobody move!" The study erupted in chaos. Julian spun toward the door, his face going white. Lord Harrington, a portly man in his 60s with gray mutton chops, stumbled backward, knocking over a crystal decanter. Two other men Elena didn't recognize scrambled for weapons. Thornfield's men were faster. They had pistols trained on the conspirators before anyone could draw. "Hands where I can see them," Thornfield commanded, his voice cold as winter. "All of you, now!" Julian raised his hand slowly, his eyes locked on Elena standing in the doorway. "You," he breathed, "you betrayed me." "No, Julian." Elena stepped into the study, her own pistol steady in her hand. "I helped destroy you. There's a difference." Harrington's face turned purple. "Thornfield, you have no authority to burst into my home. I have royal warrant to investigate treason, which is exactly what this is." Thornfield moved deeper into the room, his men flanking him. "Julian Mercer, Lord Edmund Harrington, you're under arrest for selling military intelligence to foreign powers." "You can't prove anything," Harrington snarled. "Actually, I can." Thornfield gestured to the desk where the forged documents lay scattered. "Those papers you were so eager to analyze, they're bait. Every inconsistency deliberately planted, every crime carefully fabricated, and you took them straight to your co-conspirators." Julian's face went from white to gray. "The documents were fake? Did you really think I'd let Elena hand you real evidence?" Thornfield's smile was cruel. "You walked into this trap the moment you agreed to meet her." For a moment, no one moved. The study hung in suspended tension, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Then Harrington lunged for the desk drawer. Everything happened at once. Thornfield fired, a deafening crack that made Elena's ears ring. Harrington screamed and collapsed, clutching his shoulder. One of the other conspirators pulled a pistol from his coat. Elena didn't think. She just moved, throwing herself sideways as the man fired. The bullet tore through the space where she'd been standing and shattered a window behind her. Thornfield's men returned fire. The conspirator went down hard, blood spreading across expensive carpet. Julian ran. He bolted for the door on the far side of the study, a servant's passage Elena hadn't noticed. Thornfield cursed and went after him, but Julian was already through and slamming it shut behind him. "Stay with Harrington," Thornfield shouted to his men. Then to Elena, "With me!" They crashed through the servant's door into a narrow stairwell. Footsteps pounded above them. Julian was heading for the roof. Elena's lungs burned as they climbed. 3 flights. 4. The stairwell ended at a small door that hung open, night air rushing through. They emerged onto the rooftop. London spread out below them in a tapestry of lights and shadows. The neighboring townhouses stood like silent sentinels, their roofs close enough to jump to if someone was desperate enough. Julian stood at the far edge, breathing hard. "Don't," Thornfield said, raising his pistol. "There's nowhere to run, Mercer. It's over." Julian's laugh was wild, unhinged. "Over? You think arresting me ends this? I'm just one piece, Thornfield. The network reaches into Parliament, the military, the Crown itself. You can't stop it. Watch me." "And what about Elena?" Julian's eyes found her and something desperate flashed across his face. "Did you tell her the truth? About why you really wanted her help?" Elena's blood ran cold. "What's he talking about?" Thornfield didn't lower his weapon. "He's trying to manipulate you. Don't listen." "No, Elena, listen very carefully." Julian took a step forward, ignoring the pistol aimed at his chest. "Ask him why he was investigating your father's case 6 months ago. Ask him why he was already planning to clear your father's name before you ever asked him to dance." Elena's world tilted. "What?" "Shut up, Mercer," Thornfield growled. But Julian was smiling now, vicious and broken. "He knew your father was innocent all along. He had the evidence. He could have freed Thomas Whitmore months ago." Julian's voice rose. But he didn't, because he needed you desperate, needed you vulnerable, needed you willing to do anything for justice. That's not... Elena turned to Thornfield. Tell me he's lying. Thornfield's expression was stone. Tell me. Elena's voice cracked. I had the evidence, Thornfield said quietly. 4 months ago. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. But I needed more than your father's innocence. I needed the entire conspiracy. And you... He met her eyes, and for the first time, Elena saw something like regret there. You were the perfect way to draw them out. The wrong daughter, the desperate woman. Julian couldn't resist trying to use you. Neither could Harrington. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pistol in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. You used me, she whispered, from the very beginning. Yes. The dance, the engagement, everything. Was strategy, yes. Julian laughed again, the sound horrible. At least I was honest about being a monster, Elena. Thornfield pretended to be your savior while planning how to sacrifice you all along. Elena's vision blurred. With tears or rage, she couldn't tell. She raised her pistol. Both men froze. For 5 endless seconds, Elena stood there with the weapon aimed somewhere between Thornfield and Julian, her hand shaking, her world shattered into pieces she couldn't put back together. Julian had destroyed her family with lies, but Thornfield had used her grief as bait. One was a traitor. The other was a weapon without mercy, and she'd trusted both of them. Elena, Thornfield said carefully, lower the gun. Why should I? Her voice was raw. You got what you wanted. The conspiracy exposed, Julian caught. Why do you need me anymore? Because... A shot rang out, but it didn't come from Elena's pistol. It came from the rooftop door behind them. Thornfield spun, his coat flaring. Elena dove instinctively, hitting the roof hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. A figure emerged from the stairwell, the 5th person, the one who'd entered through the servant's entrance and disappeared. In the moonlight, Elena saw her face. A woman, mid-40s, elegant even in travel-stained clothes. Her pistol was steady, professional, aimed directly at Thornfield. Step away from the girl, the woman said in accented English. French, Elena realized. Both of you. Thornfield didn't move. Who are you? Someone who's invested a great deal of money in making sure this conspiracy continues. The woman's smile was cold. You've been very troublesome, Duke Thornfield. Very expensive. My employers are quite displeased. Julian scrambled backward. I didn't know. They didn't tell me. Of course they didn't. You're a pawn, Mercer, just like the girl. The woman's gaze flicked to Elena, though she's proven more resourceful than expected. Elena pushed herself to her knees, her pistol still gripped tight. Who do you work for? Does it matter? Your precious kingdom has so many enemies. The woman took a step closer to Thornfield. Drop your weapon, Duke, or I'll kill the girl and disappear before your men even know I was here. Thornfield's jaw clenched. Slowly, he lowered his pistol. Good. Now kick it away. He did. The woman smiled. You know, I almost admire you, Thornfield. 10 years hunting traitors? How many families destroyed? How many lives ruined? All because you couldn't save your brother. Thornfield's face went white. Oh yes, I know all about James Thornfield, young, brilliant, dead because someone sold his ship's position. The woman's voice was mocking. Did you ever wonder who gave the order? Who actually pulled the trigger on that particular transaction? Tell me. Why? So you can have closure before I kill you? The woman laughed. No, Duke, you'll die wondering, just like your brother did. She raised her pistol. Elena didn't think, didn't plan, didn't hesitate. She fired. The shot went wide. She was shaking too hard for accuracy, but it was enough. The woman jerked sideways, her own shot going high. The bullet meant for Thornfield's head whistled past his ear instead. Thornfield moved like lightning. He closed the distance before the woman could recover, slamming into her with his full weight. They went down hard, grappling for the pistol. Julian bolted. He sprinted for the edge of the roof, clearly planning to jump to the neighboring building. He almost made it, but the gap was wider than it looked, and Julian had always been better at running from consequences than facing them. He jumped. His fingers caught the opposite roof's edge. held for one desperate second, then slipped. Julian Mercer's scream cut off abruptly when he hit the cobblestones 4 stories below. Elena heard herself making a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob. She couldn't look away from where Julian had disappeared, couldn't process what had just happened. On the other side of the roof, Thornfield had wrestled the pistol away from the French agent. He hauled her to her feet, his hand locked around her throat. "Who gave the order?" he snarled. "Who sold my brother's position?" The woman smiled through the choking grip. Blood trickled from her split lip. "Go to hell, Duke." Then she bit down hard on something in her mouth. Thornfield cursed and shoved her away, but it was too late. The woman collapsed, convulsing once, then going still. White foam appeared at the corners of her mouth. Poison capsule. Dead in under 30 seconds. Thornfield stood over her body, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. Elena finally found her voice. "Is she—" "Yes." Thornfield's voice was hollow, and any answers she had died with her. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Thornfield's men burst onto the roof, weapons drawn, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "Your Grace!" Mercer jumped. The French agent took poison. Thornfield's voice was mechanical now, all emotion stripped away. "Secure the bodies, get a message to the Crown, and find out who else was involved in tonight's operation." His men scattered to follow orders. Thornfield turned to Elena. She was still on her knees, her pistol hanging loose in her hand, her entire body shaking. "You saved my life," Thornfield said quietly. Elena looked up at him, at the man who'd used her grief as bait, who'd known her father was innocent and said nothing, who'd orchestrated everything from the moment she walked across that ballroom floor. "I shouldn't have." She stood on trembling legs and walked past him toward the stairs. "Miss Whitmore." "Don't." Elena's voice was ice. "Don't thank me. Don't apologize. Don't say anything." She descended into the townhouse, leaving Thornfield alone on the roof with 2 bodies and the wreckage of his 10-year hunt for vengeance. Dawn was breaking when they returned to Thornfield House. Elena went straight to her rooms without a word. Lily tried to help her undress, but Elena sent the maid away. She wanted to be alone, needed to be alone. She stood by the window, still wearing her blood-stained dress, watching the sun rise over London. Julian was dead. The man who'd destroyed her family, who'd lied under oath, who'd helped sell military secrets to foreign powers. Dead. And Elena felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a vast, empty hollowness where emotion should have been. A knock at the door. "Go away," Elena said. The door opened anyway. Thornfield stood in the doorway looking exactly as destroyed as Elena felt. He'd cleaned the blood off his hands, but his shirt was still torn from the rooftop struggle. His eyes were hollow. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I don't want to hear it." "I know." Thornfield stepped into the room and closed the door. "But you're going to anyway." He reached into his coat and pulled out a document. Not the pardon he'd promised. Something else. "This is your father's release order, signed by the Crown Prosecutor this morning. Thomas Whitmore will be freed from debtor's prison by noon today. All charges dropped. Full restoration of seized assets. Official apology from Parliament." Elena stared at the document, then at Thornfield. "You got him out." "I told you I would." "You also told me you needed me for the investigation, that without my help you couldn't catch the conspirators." Elena's voice was shaking. "But you had the evidence all along. You could have freed him months ago." "Yes. So why didn't you?" Thornfield was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm not a good man, Miss Whitmore. I'm a weapon. And weapons don't make moral choices. They complete missions." He met her eyes. "Your father's innocence was never the question. The conspiracy was. And I needed every piece in place before I could move. So you used me." "Yes, and you do it again." Thornfield didn't flinch. "To stop a network that's killed hundreds of soldiers and sailors? To prevent foreign powers from buying our kingdom's secrets? Yes, I would." Elena wanted to hate him, should have hated him, but looking at Thornfield's hollow eyes, she saw something she recognized. Grief turned into a weapon, just like her desperation had been. "Your brother," she said quietly. "The French agent said someone gave the order. Do you know who it was?" "No, and now I might never know." Thornfield's jaw tightened. "Harrington is alive, but he's only talking through lawyers. The other conspirators are dead. The trail goes cold." "So 10 years of hunting, and you're no closer to the truth." "No." Elena took the release order from his hand, her father's freedom, purchased with lies and blood and desperate gambles. "What happens now?" she asked. Thornfield moved toward the door. "Now you take that document to debtor's prison. You free your father. You rebuild your family's reputation. And you forget about the Wolf Duke and his wars." He opened the door. "Your Grace." Thornfield paused, not looking back. Elena stared at the release order, at the official seals and signatures that represented everything she'd fought for. Then she looked at the man who'd used her to get it. "The French agent," Elena said slowly. Before she died, she mentioned employers, plural, which means this conspiracy isn't over. "No, it's not. And you're going to keep hunting. Until every traitor is dead or in chains, yes." Elena folded the release order carefully and placed it on her dressing table. Then she turned to face Thornfield fully. "Then I'm staying." Thornfield spun around. "What? You heard me? I'm staying. The engagement continues." Elena's voice was steady now, her decision made. "Because you're right. This conspiracy isn't finished, and my family's name isn't truly cleared until everyone who framed my father is exposed. Miss Whitmore, tonight you nearly died. So did you, multiple times." Elena stepped closer. "You used me as bait because I was desperate and vulnerable. Fine. But now I'm choosing to be bait, choosing to help you finish this. Not because you're manipulating me, but because it's the right thing to do." Thornfield stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You should hate me." "I do." Elena's smile was bitter. "But I hate the people who killed your brother and framed my father more. So we're going to work together as equals this time. No more lies, no more manipulation. Just two people hunting the monsters who destroyed our families." For a long moment, Thornfield didn't respond. He just studied Elena with those storm-gray eyes, clearly trying to figure out if she was serious. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "Partners, then. Equal stakes, equal risk." Elena took his hand. His grip was cold, firm, and for the first time held something that might have been respect. "Partners." They shook once. And in that moment, standing in her blood-stained dress while dawn light filled the room, Elena Whitmore made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She would hunt traitors alongside the kingdom's most dangerous man. She would finish what her desperate dance had started, and she would make sure that everyone who destroyed innocent families paid the price, even if it killed her. The carriage to debtor's prison left at 8 o'clock sharp. Elena sat alone in the back, clutching her father's release order like a lifeline. The morning sun cut through London's perpetual fog, painting the grimy streets in shades of gold and gray. She'd changed into a simple dress, dark blue with minimal ornamentation, and pulled her hair back severely. She wanted to look composed when she saw her father, strong, not like the broken girl who'd watched her world collapse 18 months ago. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thornfield had offered to accompany her. She'd refused. This moment belonged to her family alone, not to the Wolf Duke and his endless wars against corruption. The prison loomed ahead, a massive stone fortress that squatted on the edge of the city like a malignant growth. Iron gates, narrow windows, the smell of human misery condensed into architecture. Elena had visited 3 times since her father's conviction. Each time she'd left feeling more helpless than before. Watching Thomas Whitmore waste away in a cell, his spirit breaking under the weight of false accusations, had been the cruelest torture of all. But today was different. Today she carried his freedom in her hands. The guards recognized her at the gate. They always did. The disgraced daughter was a familiar sight. But when she presented the release order bearing the Crown Prosecutor's seal and signature, their expressions shifted from contempt to shock. "This is legitimate?" the senior guard asked, studying the document. "Signed this morning. You can verify it with the magistrate's office if you need to." The The guard handed it back slowly. "No need, miss. We'll have him ready within the hour." An hour felt like eternity. Elena waited in a sparse receiving room, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through barred windows. She tried to plan what she'd say, how to explain everything that had happened. The dance, Thornfield, Julian's death, the conspiracy. But every rehearsed speech died in her throat. Finally, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door opened. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. He'd aged a decade in 18 months. His hair had gone completely gray. His once robust frame had thinned to the point of frailty. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes Elena remembered from childhood, were still the same. They locked onto her face, and something broke in his expression. "Elena?" She crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around him. He felt impossibly fragile, like he might shatter if she held too tight. "You're free," she whispered into his shoulder. "Papa, you're free. All charges dropped." "Full pardon. It's over." Thomas pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. "How? The evidence, the testimony." "Was all lies, fabricated by Julian Mercer and his co-conspirators." Elena's voice steadied. "We proved it, exposed them. The Crown Prosecutor issued your release this morning." Her father's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the nearest chair, his hands trembling. "Julian Mercer, that boy who courted you, he did this?" "Yes." "And he's dead. He fell from a rooftop trying to escape arrest." Elena knelt beside her father's chair. "It's a long story, Papa. And I'll tell you all of it. But first, let's get you out of here." The process of official release took another 2 hours. Documents to sign, personal effects to reclaim, official statements to record. Through it all, Thomas moved like a man in a dream, unable to fully process that his nightmare was ending. Finally, they stepped out into the prison courtyard. Thomas stopped at the gate, tilting his face toward the sun. He stood there for a full minute, just breathing free air. "I didn't think I'd ever see the outside again," he said quietly. Elena took his arm. "Come on, there's a carriage waiting." But Thomas didn't move. He turned to face his daughter, really looking at her for the first time since his arrest. "You did this. Somehow you made this happen." "I had help." "From whom?" Elena hesitated. "Duke Alexander Thornfield." Her father's expression darkened. "The Wolf Duke?" "Elena, that man is dangerous." "I know. Believe me, I know." Elena guided him toward the waiting carriage. "But he's also the only person with enough power to expose the conspiracy that framed you. And now we're working together to finish what we started." Thomas stopped walking. "We?" "I'm staying at Thornfield House, under the pretense of an engagement." Elena met her father's horrified gaze steadily. "The conspiracy isn't finished, Papa. Julian and Lord Harrington were just pieces of a larger network. If we stop now, the real architects escape, and everything we've suffered means nothing." "You're talking about continuing to put yourself in danger. I'm talking about making sure this never happens to another family." Thomas studied his daughter's face, the determination there, the steel that 18 months of suffering had forged in her spine, and slowly nodded. "Your mother would be furious with me for allowing this. Mother would understand that sometimes the only way through hell is straight ahead." A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "She would at that." He climbed into the carriage. "Very well. Tell me everything, and I mean everything, Elena. Don't spare the ugly parts." So as the carriage rolled through London toward Thornfield House, Elena told her father the whole truth. The dance, the fake engagement, the documents used as bait, Julian's betrayal and death, the French agent and her poison capsule. By the time she finished, they were pulling up to Thornfield's gates. Thomas stared at the fortress-like mansion. "You're living here?" "In the guest wing, chaperoned by Mrs. Caldwell, who runs the household with an iron fist." Elena managed a smile. "It's actually safer than anywhere else in London. Thornfield has guards, security measures, and enough paranoia to spot threats a mile away." "That's supposed to be comforting?" "These days? Yes." The carriage stopped. Thomas climbed out slowly, still weak from 18 months of prison food and confined quarters. Thornfield was waiting at the entrance. He'd changed clothes, now wearing a simple dark suit that made him look less like a weapon and more like a gentleman. But the hard set of his jaw and the cold calculation in his eyes hadn't softened. "Mr. Whitmore," Thornfield said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Thornfield House." Thomas stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he took it, his grip firm despite his weakened state. "Your Grace, my daughter tells me I owe you my freedom." "You owe me nothing. The evidence proved your innocence. I simply ensured it reached the right people, and nearly got my daughter killed in the process." Thornfield didn't flinch. "Yes." The two men regarded each other. Elena could feel the tension crackling between them, her father's protective fury meeting the Wolf Duke's unapologetic pragmatism. Finally, Thomas released Thornfield's hand. "I don't like you, Your Grace, and I don't trust you. But Elena seems to believe you're necessary for this fight." He straightened, finding some of his old merchant steel. "So I'll make you a deal. You keep my daughter safe, and I'll help with your investigation. My shipping business had connections throughout London's merchant class. If your conspiracy involves moving money or goods, I might recognize the patterns." Thornfield's expression shifted fractionally. Not quite surprise, but acknowledgement. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Whitmore." "It's a pragmatic one. My reputation is ruined until every person involved in framing me is exposed. So let's expose them." Thomas glanced at Elena. "Besides, I raised my daughter to finish what she starts. Apparently she's chosen to finish this." "Apparently so." Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, efficient as always. "Your Grace, Mr. Whitmore's rooms are prepared. 3rd floor, east wing. I've arranged for a physician to examine him this afternoon." "Excellent. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Thornfield turned back to Thomas. "Please rest. We'll brief you on the investigation tomorrow." Thomas nodded and followed Mrs. Caldwell inside. Elena started to follow, but Thornfield caught her arm. "Your father is a good man." "I know. He deserves better than this. Better than being dragged into a conspiracy that nearly destroyed him once already." Elena met Thornfield's eyes. "He deserves justice. Real justice. Not the kind that stops halfway because it's convenient." Thornfield's grip on her arm tightened fractionally. Then he released her. "Tomorrow morning, my study, 7 o'clock. We plan the next phase." "I'll be there." Elena climbed the stairs to her rooms, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She'd been awake for over 30 hours. Had killed a man, or at least tried to, had watched Julian fall to his death, had partnered with the kingdom's most dangerous investigator, and somehow freed her father from prison. She collapsed onto her bed, still fully clothed, and fell into dreamless sleep. 7 o'clock came too quickly. Elena woke to Lily knocking softly on her door, carrying a breakfast tray and a pot of strong tea. She ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to the meeting in Thornfield's study. She dressed carefully, a practical gray dress with minimal skirts that wouldn't impede movement. If last night had taught her anything, it was that fashion was secondary to survival. The pistol Thornfield had given her sat on her dressing table. After a moment's hesitation, Elena tucked it into a hidden pocket in her skirt. Better to have it and not need it. Thornfield's study looked different in morning light, less like a war room, more like a scholar's sanctuary. But the maps were still there, pinned to the walls. The surveillance reports still littered the desk. Thornfield stood by the window with 2 other men Elena didn't recognize. "Miss Whitmore? Good. We're just starting." Thornfield gestured to the strangers. "This is Captain Marcus Webb, formerly of His Majesty's Naval Intelligence. And this is Mr. Simon Ashford, Crown Prosecutor." Both men nodded to Elena. Webb was tall and weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent years at sea. Ashford was younger, sharp-eyed, with ink stains on his fingers. "Gentlemen, Miss Whitmore is the reason we exposed Julian Mercer and Lord Harrington's conspiracy. She'll be participating in this investigation going forward." Webb raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Ashford's expression remained carefully neutral. "Now then," Thornfield continued, moving to the map-covered wall. "Lord Harrington survived the rooftop confrontation. He's currently in custody, but his lawyers have sealed off any possibility of interrogation. We won't get information from him. What about the others? Elena asked. 2 dead. 1, a banker named Reeves, is in custody but claiming ignorance. Says he just moved money, didn't ask questions. Ashford pulled out a file. We're building a case, but it's thin. Without testimony from Harrington or Mercer, we're relying on circumstantial evidence. What about the French agent? Webb asked. Thornfield's expression darkened. Dead by suicide before we could question her. But her presence confirms foreign involvement, which means this conspiracy has diplomatic protection. The room fell silent. Elena studied the map. It showed shipping routes marked with red pins. What are these? Routes where naval positions were sold, Thornfield explained. Over the past 3 years, 17 ships were ambushed because someone leaked their locations. My brother's vessel was the first. Elena's breath caught. 17 ships. Hundreds of sailors dead. The French agent mentioned a shipment arriving Tuesday, she said slowly. Gold in exchange for Atlantic Fleet positions. That's in 4 days. Yes, but we don't know where the exchange is happening. Thornfield traced the shipping routes with one finger. It could be any port from Dover to Plymouth. Thomas Whitmore's voice came from the doorway. It's Dover. Everyone turned. Elena's father stood in the entrance, leaning heavily on a walking stick, but looking more alert than yesterday. Mr. Whitmore, Thornfield said, you should be resting. I've had 18 months of rest. It didn't agree with me. Thomas moved into the study, his merchant's eye scanning the maps. You're looking at this wrong. You're tracking naval routes, but gold shipments don't move through naval channels. They move through private merchant shipping. He pointed to Dover on the map. Dover handles more private cargo than any port in England. If I wanted to move French gold into the country without alerting customs, I'd use a merchant vessel registered under a false flag. Dutch, probably. Pay off the harbor master. Unload at night. Webb leaned forward. You're sure? I ran a shipping empire for 30 years before Julian Mercer destroyed it. I know how smugglers think. Thomas's voice was grim. Check Dover's manifests for the past month. Look for Dutch vessels with irregular schedules. Ships that arrive but don't leave on time. That's your smuggling operation. Thornfield and Ashford exchanged glances. Can you do that? Thornfield asked the prosecutor. I can have manifests by this afternoon. If Whitmore's right, he's right, Elena said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Julian's family owned shipping companies. They'd know exactly how to move contraband, and my father knows their methods better than anyone. Thornfield nodded slowly. Then we focus on Dover. Webb, coordinate with naval intelligence. I want ships ready to intercept any vessel attempting to leave after Tuesday's exchange. Ashford, secure warrants to search the docks. Miss Whitmore, I'm coming with you to Dover. Absolutely not. Elena crossed her arms. We're partners, remember? Equal stakes, equal risk. Dover will be dangerous. If the conspirators suspect we know about the exchange, then they'll change locations and we'll lose our chance. Elena moved to stand beside her father at the map. But if the disgraced merchant's daughter and her supposedly infatuated Duke appear in Dover for a romantic seaside holiday, no one suspects an investigation. Silence. Then Webb laughed, a short, barking sound. She's right. A couple on holiday is perfect cover. It's also perfect bait, Ashford added. If there are other conspirators watching, and there almost certainly are, they'll see Thornfield distracted, vulnerable. Thornfield's jaw clenched. Miss Whitmore nearly died 2 nights ago. And I'll nearly die again if we don't stop these people. Elena's voice was steel. We do this together, or not at all. For a long moment, Thornfield stared at her. Then he turned to the others. Gentlemen, we'll continue this in 1 hour. I need to speak with Miss Whitmore privately. Webb and Ashford filed out. Thomas hesitated, looking at his daughter. Papa, I'll be fine. That's what worries me. But he left, closing the door behind him. The moment they were alone, Thornfield rounded on Elena. You can't keep throwing yourself into danger like this. Neither can you, but you do it anyway. That's different. I've been doing this for 10 years. I know how to survive. Then teach me. Elena stepped closer. You want to keep me safe? Fine. Train me. Show me how to fight, how to shoot properly, how to read a situation before it turns deadly. Make me an asset instead of a liability. Thornfield opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. His eyes narrowed, studying her face. You're serious. Completely. Training isn't gentle, Miss Whitmore. It's brutal, painful. There's no room for hesitation or mercy. Good, because the people we're hunting showed my family no mercy. I don't plan to show them any either. Something shifted in Thornfield's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition, as if he were finally seeing Elena as something other than a chess piece. Very well. We leave for Dover in 2 days. That gives us time to prepare. He moved to a locked cabinet and pulled out a wooden case. But if you're going to be my partner in this investigation, you need to be armed properly. He opened the case. Inside were 2 pistols, smaller and lighter than the one Elena had used on the rooftop, but clearly high quality. These were my mother's, Thornfield said quietly. She died when I was 12, hunting accident. He lifted one pistol. She taught me to shoot, said a weapon was only as good as the person wielding it. He handed the pistol to Elena. It was beautiful, polished wood grip, silver barrel, perfect balance. We start training this afternoon, Thornfield continued. You'll learn to shoot, to fight, and to read situations the way I do. By the time we reach Dover, you'll be ready. Elena checked the pistol's mechanisms the way her father had taught her years ago. Chamber empty. Safety engaged. Weight distributed properly. She looked up at Thornfield. I won't let you down. I know. Thornfield's voice was quiet. That's what concerns me. Tech. The next 48 hours were the most grueling of Elena's life. Thornfield kept his word about training being brutal. They started in the estate's private shooting range, a long gallery in the basement with targets set up at various distances. Thornfield watched Elena's form, correcting her stance, her grip, her breathing. You're anticipating the recoil, he said after her 5th shot went wide. Trust the weapon. Let it do its work. Elena adjusted her stance, breathed, fired. The shot hit dead center. Better. Again. They practiced until Elena's arms ached and her ears rang despite the cotton wadding Thornfield insisted she use. Then they moved to hand-to-hand combat. You're smaller than most opponents, Thornfield explained, circling her in the estate's training room, which means you can't rely on strength. You use speed, precision, and your opponent's momentum against them. He demonstrated quick strikes to vulnerable points, ways to break holds, how to use a knife when a pistol wasn't an option. Then he made Elena practice on him. Don't hold back, he ordered. If you hesitate in a real fight, you die. Elena struck. Thornfield blocked easily and swept her legs. She hit the mat hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Again. She got up, attacked, went down even harder. Again. By the end of the first day, Elena was covered in bruises and could barely lift her arms. But she could hit a target at 50 feet, could break a wrist hold, could read an opponent's tells before they struck. The second day was worse. Thornfield introduced scenarios, simulated attacks, multiple opponents, fighting in confined spaces. He brought in 2 of his men to serve as additional training partners. Elena learned what it felt like to be genuinely afraid for her life, to make split-second decisions with a weapon in her hand, to trust her instincts even when logic screamed otherwise. You're thinking too much, Thornfield said after she froze during a simulated ambush. Your mind is your enemy in moments like this. Trust your training. React. They ran the scenario again. This time, Elena didn't freeze. She moved on instinct, dropped low, drew her pistol, fired at the first attacker, rolled behind cover, engaged the second. When the smoke cleared, both training partners were down, and Elena was still standing. Thornfield nodded. Good. You're learning. By the evening of the second day, Elena could barely walk up the stairs to her room. Mrs. Caldwell had Lily draw a hot bath, and Elena soaked for an hour, letting the heat work into her battered muscles. But when she looked at herself in the mirror afterward, she saw someone different, someone harder, sharper, more dangerous, someone who could survive what was coming. A knock at the door. Miss Elena? Lily's voice. His Grace requests your presence in the study. Elena dressed quickly and descended to Thornfield's war room. Ashford was there, looking exhausted but triumphant. He spread several documents across the desk. We found it. A Dutch vessel called the Margaret. Arrived in Dover 3 weeks ago carrying textiles. Should have departed 10 days ago but keeps filing extensions. The harbor master's records show irregular payments. That's the smuggling ship, Thomas said from his chair by the window. He'd been studying manifests all day. I recognized the pattern. False cargo to justify the arrival, then delays while they arrange the real transaction. Thornfield studied the documents. The exchange is scheduled for Tuesday night, which gives us 1 day to get into position. We leave tomorrow morning, Elena said. Yes. Thornfield met her eyes. Are you ready? Elena thought of the past 2 days. The training, the bruises, the fear and pain transformed into skills she'd never imagined needing. Yes. Then we finish this in Dover. Thornfield's smile was cold and predatory. We catch them in the act, arrest everyone involved, and tear this conspiracy out by its roots. Webb leaned forward. What about the French? If their agent was willing to die rather than be captured, then we assume they'll have more agents protecting this shipment. Thornfield's voice was grim. Which is why we're not going in alone. Webb, coordinate with Naval Command. I want a full company of Marines ready to move on my signal. Already done, Your Grace. Good. Thornfield began rolling up the maps. We leave at dawn, travel light. The cover story is a holiday, so pack accordingly. Once we're in Dover, we identify the exchange location, set up surveillance, and wait for them to make their move. Ashford gathered his documents. And if something goes wrong, then we improvise. Thornfield's eyes were hard. But nothing goes wrong. We've come too far to fail now. The meeting broke up. Everyone scattered to prepare. Elena started toward the door, but Thornfield called her back. Miss Whitmore, one more thing. She turned. Thornfield pulled a small wooden box from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Inside was a ring, simple silver band with a small sapphire stone. If we're maintaining the engagement fiction, you'll need this. Thornfield's voice was matter of fact. It was my mother's as well. She would have wanted it used for something meaningful. Elena stared at the ring. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry she'd seen on society ladies. I can't. It's not a proposal, Miss Whitmore. It's a prop, essential for our cover in Dover. Thornfield's tone softened fractionally. Besides, if we succeed, you'll have earned it. Consider it payment for services rendered. Elena slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Thank you, Your Grace. Alexander. Elena blinked. What? If we're going to convince people we're engaged, you should probably use my given name, at least in public. Thornfield's expression was unreadable. And I'll call you Elena. Formality will make the charade obvious. It was the first time he'd suggested anything remotely personal. The first crack in his armor of cold professionalism. Elena nodded slowly. Very well, Alexander? The name felt strange on her tongue. Too intimate for what they were, partners in investigation, allies in vengeance, two broken people hunting monsters together, but not friends, never that. Get some rest, Thornfield, Alexander said. Tomorrow, we go to war. Dawn broke cold and gray over London. The carriage stood ready in Thornfield's courtyard, larger than the one Elena had used before, built for long travel, with luggage secured on top. Alexander supervised the loading personally, checking every strap and harness. Thomas embraced Elena tightly before she climbed in. Be careful, he whispered, and come back alive. I will, Papa, I promise. Mrs. Caldwell handed Elena a traveling bag. Practical clothes on top, evening wear beneath in case you need to attend functions, and I've included medical supplies, just in case. The older woman's expression was stern, but her eyes held worry. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, for everything. Alexander climbed in beside Elena. Two of his men, the same ones who'd helped with her combat training, took the drivers and guard positions. The carriage lurched into motion. Elena watched Thornfield House disappear behind them as they rolled through London's waking streets. Market vendors were setting up stalls. Servants hurried to early morning errands. The city looked normal, peaceful, unaware of the war being waged in its shadows. Nervous? Alexander asked. Terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He pulled out a map of Dover and spread it across his lap. The harbor district is here. The Margaret is docked at Pier 7. We'll take rooms at an inn overlooking the waterfront, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid suspicion. Elena studied the map. What if they've changed locations, if they suspect we're coming? Then we adapt, but I don't think they know. The arrests in London haven't been made public yet. As far as the conspiracy knows, we're still investigating blind. The journey to Dover took most of the day. They stopped twice to change horses, and once for a quick meal at a coaching inn. Elena tried to eat but couldn't manage more than a few bites. Her stomach was twisted in knots. By late afternoon, they reached Dover. The coastal town sprawled along white cliffs, its harbor packed with ships of every description, merchant vessels, naval frigates, fishing boats. The smell of salt and fish and tar hung heavy in the air. Their inn was called the Serpent's Crown, a respectable establishment frequented by merchants and minor nobility. The innkeeper recognized the Thornfield crest and immediately offered his finest rooms. "Honeymoon trip, Your Grace?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Something like that," Alexander replied smoothly. Their suite overlooked the harbor, perfect surveillance position. The moment the door closed behind the innkeeper, Alexander moved to the window and pulled out a spyglass. There, Pier 7. That's the Margaret. Elena joined him. Through the glass she could see the Dutch vessel clearly, a mid-sized merchant ship, sails furled, riding low in the water. "She's carrying weight," Elena observed. "More than textiles would account for." "Gold is heavy." Alexander adjusted the spyglass. "I count 3 men on deck. 2 by the gangplank, 1 at the bow, all armed. More than a merchant crew would normally carry." "Exactly." They watched for another hour as the sun began to set. Ships came and went. Dock workers loaded and unloaded cargo. Everything looked perfectly normal, but Elena could feel the tension radiating off Alexander. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hand never strayed far from the pistol at his hip. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly. "The exchange happens tomorrow night, and when it does, we'll be ready." Elena touched the ring on her finger, his mother's ring, now hers, and nodded. "We'll end this. Together." Alexander turned from the window. In the fading light, his eyes looked less like storm clouds and more like steel. Yes, together. And for the first time since that desperate dance in a London ballroom, Elena Whitmore felt something other than fear or rage or desperate determination. She felt hope, not for justice. That was still distant, uncertain, soaked in blood and sacrifice. But hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who understood what it meant to fight monsters in the dark. Someone who wouldn't flinch when the killing started. Someone who would stand beside her until the very end. The Wolf Duke had found his partner, and together they were going to tear the conspiracy apart. Tuesday arrived with storm clouds gathering over Dover's white cliffs. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of rain hammering against the inn's windows. She dressed in the dark, practical trousers and a dark coat borrowed from Alexander's luggage, her hair pinned tightly beneath a cap. The twin pistols Alexander had given her were secured in holsters at her hips, hidden beneath the coat. She looked like a man. That was the point. Alexander was already awake, standing at the window with his spyglass trained on the harbor. He'd barely slept in the 30 hours since they'd arrived in Dover. Every waking moment had been spent watching the Margaret, cataloging every person who approached it, mapping the dock workers' routines. "Anything?" Elena asked quietly. 3 new arrivals in the past hour, all Dutch sailors by their dress, but they moved like soldiers. Alexander lowered the spyglass. "The exchange is definitely happening tonight." "What time?" "Webb's intelligence suggests midnight. Low tide. Easier to move cargo when the water's calm." He glanced at her outfit and nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll blend better in the dark." Elena moved to stand beside him at the window. The harbor was barely visible through the rain, a maze of masts and rigging obscured by sheets of water. "Are your men in position?" "Yes. Webb has Marines hidden in warehouses along the waterfront. Ashford is coordinating with the local magistrate to ensure legal authority for arrests, and my personal guard are scattered throughout the dock district, watching every approach to Pier 7. What about other conspirators? The ones who weren't at Harrington's townhouse? Alexander's jaw tightened. That's the unknown variable. We arrested the obvious players, but conspiracies this large always have backup. Silent partners, people who stay hidden until they're needed. Like the French agent. Exactly. Alexander turned from the window. Which is why you stay close to me tonight. No heroics, no splitting up. We move as one unit. Elena met his eyes. Equal partners, remember? Partners watch each other's backs. That's what I'm doing. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Alexander's men entered, the shorter one named Davies, carrying a sealed message. Your Grace, from Captain Webb. Alexander tore it open, scanned the contents, and his expression hardened. What is it? Elena asked. Webb's scouts identified the contact making the exchange. A French naval officer named Captain Laurent Beaumont. He arrived this morning on a separate vessel, docked at Pier 3. Alexander crumpled the message. Beaumont commands a frigate. If things go wrong, he has firepower. Can Webb's Marines handle a naval engagement? They'll have to. Alexander moved to a trunk in the corner and began pulling out weapons. More pistols, a rifle, ammunition, knives. But it won't come to that. We take them during the exchange, when both sides are exposed and vulnerable. He handed Elena a knife in a leather sheath. Just in case the pistols aren't enough. Elena strapped it to her belt. The weight of all the weapons felt both reassuring and terrifying. This was real. Tonight, people would die. Maybe even her. Alexander, she said quietly, if something goes wrong, if I don't make it, you'll make it. But if I don't, tell my father I'm sorry for everything. Alexander stopped loading weapons and looked at her directly. For the first time since she'd met him, his expression wasn't cold calculation or grim determination. It was something almost human. You're going to survive tonight, Elena. Because I won't let you do otherwise. His voice was quiet, but absolute. I've lost too many people to this conspiracy. I won't lose you too. The words hung in the air between them, more honest than anything he'd said before. Elena realized with a start that somewhere in the past weeks, she'd become more than a chess piece to Alexander Thornfield. More than a strategic asset or convenient bait. She'd become someone he actually cared about protecting. Thank you, she whispered. Alexander nodded once, then returned to preparing weapons with renewed focus. The rest of the day crawled past with agonizing slowness. They took turns watching the harbor, eating mechanically, checking and rechecking their equipment. As evening fell, the rain intensified, turning the streets into rivers of mud. Perfect conditions for a covert exchange. At 11 o'clock, Alexander gave the signal. They left the inn through a back entrance, moving through Dover's shadowed alleys like ghosts. Two of Alexander's men flanked them, Davies and the taller guard, Holloway, both armed to the teeth. The waterfront at night was a different world. Fog rolled in from the channel, thick and impenetrable. Gas lamps created halos of sickly yellow light that barely penetrated 3 feet. Sounds were muffled and distorted. Waves against hulls, ropes creaking, distant voices that could have been human or just the wind. They took position in a warehouse directly across from Pier 7. Through gaps in the walls, Elena could see the Margaret clearly. Lanterns burned on her deck. Shadows moved purposefully, preparing for the exchange. Webb materialized from the darkness, water streaming off his military coat. Marines are in position, he reported quietly. 20 men surrounding the pier, another 30 in reserve. Ashford has magistrates standing by to make the arrests legal. And Beaumont's frigate? Alexander asked. Still docked at Pier 3. We've got eyes on it. If they try to provide cover fire, our cannons will respond. Webb's expression was grim. But it'll be ugly if it comes to that. It won't. Alexander checked his pocket watch. 15 minutes to midnight. Everyone stays hidden until I give the signal. Webb nodded and disappeared back into the fog. Elena crouched beside Alexander, her heart hammering. Through the warehouse gaps, she watched the Margaret's crew secure lines and lower a gangplank. Then figures emerged from the fog. 6 men, all wearing French naval uniforms. Leading them was a tall officer with a sharp beard and eyes that glittered with intelligence even in the dim light. Captain Beaumont. He climbed the gangplank like he owned it, his men following. On the Margaret's deck, the Dutch captain met them, a heavy-set man with a merchant's calculating expression. They spoke briefly. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she saw money change hands. A small chest, ornately carved, passed from French hands to Dutch, payment for treason. Then the Dutch captain gestured below deck. His crew emerged carrying heavy crates. Military documents, Elena realized. Maps. Fleet positions. Intelligence that would get British sailors killed. Her hands tightened around her pistols. "Wait," Alexander whispered. "Not yet." The exchange continued. More crates transferred from ship to shore. More gold-changing hands. Beaumont inspected each crate personally, clearly verifying the intelligence was legitimate. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, Beaumont nodded, satisfied. He shook the Dutch captain's hand. "Now," Alexander said. He raised his hand and gave a sharp whistle. The warehouse doors burst open. Marines poured out from hiding spots all along the waterfront, weapons drawn, moving with military precision. "Stop! In the name of the Crown! You're all under arrest!" Chaos erupted. The French sailors went for their weapons. The Dutch crew scattered. Beaumont drew his sword and pistol simultaneously, bellowing orders in French. Gunfire exploded across the pier. Alexander was already moving. He burst from the warehouse with Elena right behind him, his men flanking. They hit the pier at a dead run, pistols blazing. A French sailor appeared in front of Elena. She didn't hesitate, fired twice, center mass. He went down hard. Her training took over. She moved on instinct, dropping behind cover, engaging targets, advancing when Alexander advanced and covering when he reloaded. They fought like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. The Marines were overwhelming the conspirators through sheer numbers. French sailors fell. Dutch crew surrendered. But Beaumont was a trained naval officer. He rallied his men into a fighting retreat toward the gangplank. "He's trying to reach his ship," Webb shouted over the gunfire. Alexander cursed and sprinted after Beaumont. Elena followed without thinking. They hit the Margaret's deck at the same moment Beaumont did. The French captain spun, sword flashing. Alexander blocked with his own blade. When had he drawn it? And the two men engaged in a brutal duel. Elena aimed her pistol, but couldn't get a clean shot. The men moved too fast, too close together. Then she saw movement from the corner of her eye. Another figure climbing onto the deck. Not a sailor, not a Marine. A woman. Mid-40s. Elegant. Moving with deadly grace. Elena's blood froze. She recognized that face. From the rooftop. From the moment before the French agent had bitten down on poison. Except this woman wasn't the same agent. She was older, more refined. But the eyes were identical. "Alexander!" Elena screamed. Thornfield turned just as the woman raised a pistol aimed at his back. Elena fired. Her shot took the woman in the shoulder, spinning her around. The woman's pistol discharged wildly, the bullet ricocheting off the ship's mast. Alexander didn't hesitate. He disengaged from Beaumont and closed on the wounded woman in 3 strides. But she was already reaching for her mouth. "No!" Alexander grabbed her jaw, trying to prevent her from biting down. Too late. The woman's eyes went wide. White foam appeared at her lips. She collapsed, convulsing. Another poison capsule. Another French agent dead before they could be questioned. "Damn it!" Alexander released the body and spun back to Beaumont. But the French captain was already at the ship's rail. He gave Alexander one last contemptuous look, then dove into the dark water below. "Marines, in the water! Don't let him reach his ship!" Webb's voice carried across the chaos. Splashes, shouts, more gunfire. But the fog was too thick, the water too dark. Beaumont disappeared into the night. Elena sank to her knees on the deck, breathing hard. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and the sick realization of what she'd just done. She'd killed someone. Again. Maybe multiple someones. She'd lost count during the firefight. Alexander appeared beside her, pulling her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "No, I don't think so." Elena looked around the deck. Bodies everywhere. French sailors, Dutch crew, And the woman, the second French agent, lying dead with Elena's bullet wound in her shoulder. "I killed her," Elena whispered. "You saved my life." Alexander's grip on her arm tightened. "If you hadn't fired when you did, I'd be dead." Webb climbed onto the deck, his uniform torn and blood-stained, but his expression triumphant. "We've got them, Your Grace, 12 French sailors in custody, the Dutch captain and his entire crew, and—" He gestured to the crates of stolen intelligence. Everything they were trying to sell, maps, fleet positions, 3 years' worth of treason documented and ready for trial. Alexander nodded slowly. "And Beaumont?" Webb's expression darkened. "Escaped. We're searching the harbor, but in this fog, he'll make it back to France." Alexander's voice was bitter. "And the real architects of this conspiracy will remain hidden. Not all of them." Everyone turned. Davies was climbing onto the deck, dragging someone behind him, a man in expensive clothes, his hands bound, his face pale with terror. "Found this one trying to slip away in the chaos," Davies reported. "Says he's just a banker. But he had this on him." Davies held up a leather folder. Elena recognized it immediately, the same kind of folder that had held the forged documents she'd given Julian. Alexander took it and opened it. His expression changed. Not triumph, not satisfaction, pure, cold rage. "What is it?" Elena asked. Alexander showed her the contents. Lists of names, dates, transactions, all meticulously documented in cramped handwriting. Every noble family involved in the conspiracy, every payment made, every piece of intelligence sold. And at the bottom, in different handwriting, bolder, more confident, a signature. Admiral Sir Harrison Blake. Webb went white. "The First Sea Lord, he's the head of the entire conspiracy," Alexander finished. "The man responsible for every ship lost, every sailor killed, including my brother." The bound banker started babbling. "I'm just the accountant. I only moved money. I didn't know what it was for." Alexander backhanded him into silence. Then he turned to Webb. "Get every piece of evidence loaded onto secure transport. Nothing goes missing. Nothing gets lost. I want this delivered directly to the Crown Prosecutor by dawn." "And the prisoners?" "Military custody, no lawyers, no visitors. Lock them in the deepest cell you can find until trial." Alexander's eyes were like ice. "And send a message to London, to Ashford. Tell him to arrest Admiral Blake immediately, before he realizes we've found his records." Webb saluted and started shouting orders. The pier transformed into organized chaos. Marines securing prisoners, evidence being cataloged and loaded, the wounded being carried to medical tents. Elena stood in the center of it all, still holding her smoking pistols, watching the conspiracy that had destroyed her family finally collapse. "We did it," she whispered. Alexander stood beside her, his own weapons still drawn, his face hard. "Not yet. Blake still walks free. Beaumont escaped, and there are probably more agents we haven't identified." He looked at Elena. "But yes, we broke the network, exposed the traitors. This part is finished." The rain had stopped. Dawn was beginning to break over Dover's harbor, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. Elena looked down at the dead French agent at her feet, the woman who'd tried to kill Alexander, who'd chosen poison over capture. "Why do they do it?" she asked quietly. "Die rather than talk. What are they so afraid of?" "Not afraid. Loyal." Alexander's voice was grim. "These agents are true believers. They'd rather die than betray their cause, which makes them more dangerous than any mercenary." He turned away from the body. "Come on. We need to get back to London. If Blake realizes what we've uncovered, he'll run. And I want to be there when they drag him out of his mansion in chains." The journey back to London took 12 hours. They rode in a military convoy, 3 carriages surrounded by armed Marines with the evidence locked in steel boxes and guarded like crown jewels. Elena dozed fitfully against Alexander's shoulder, too exhausted to care about propriety. When she woke, they were already inside London's city limits. "What time is it?" she mumbled. 8 in the evening. We'll be at Thornfield House within the hour." Alexander was reading a report that had been delivered at their last stop. "Ashford arrested Blake this morning. He's in custody at the Tower of London, awaiting trial." Elena sat up fully. "Did he resist?" "Tried to. shot 2 arresting officers before they subdued him. Alexander's smile was cold. He's alive, though. He'll stand trial, face justice for every sailor he killed. The weight of it settled over Elena like a blanket. They'd actually done it, exposed the conspiracy, arrested the traitor at the very top of the naval command. Her father's name would be completely cleared. The real criminals would face execution, justice, real justice. So why did she feel so empty? The carriage rolled through Mayfair's familiar streets. Gas lamps flickered to life as darkness fell. Well-dressed couples strolled toward theaters and dinner parties, completely unaware that the kingdom's entire naval hierarchy had just been torn apart. Thornfield House appeared ahead, its windows blazing with light. The moment the carriage stopped, the front door burst open. Thomas Whitmore stood in the entrance, looking years younger than when Elena had left 3 days ago. His face was full of desperate relief. Elena stumbled out of the carriage and into her father's embrace. "Thank the heavens," Thomas whispered into her hair. "When the reports came in, the firefight in Dover, I thought, 'I'm fine, Papa. I'm fine.'" Elena pulled back. "And it's over. All of it. The conspiracy is broken." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I know. Ashford sent word. Admiral Blake arrested. Full exoneration for our family. Elena, we've won." Mrs. Caldwell appeared with blankets and hot tea, shepherding them inside with brisk efficiency. "You're both frozen solid, inside, now, baths drawn, dinner waiting." Elena let herself be guided upstairs, too exhausted to argue. Lily helped her out of the blood-stained clothes and into the steaming bath. Elena sank into the water and finally let herself cry. Not from pain or fear or grief, from relief. It was finally over. 3 days later, Elena stood in the gallery of Parliament, watching Admiral Sir Harrison Blake's trial unfold. The room was packed, every seat filled with nobles, military officers, and journalists furiously scribbling notes. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents from Dover, the testimony of captured conspirators, the banking records showing years of payments. Blake sat in the defendant's box, his naval uniform stripped of all insignia. He looked smaller now, broken. The prosecutor, Ashford, promoted for his role in exposing the conspiracy, presented the final piece of evidence, a letter, written in Blake's own hand, ordering the sale of fleet positions that had led to 17 naval ambushes, including the one that killed James Thornfield. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Alexander sat in the front row, his face carved from stone. Elena watched him from across the room, saw the moment he finally heard confirmation of what he'd suspected for 10 years. The man who'd ordered his brother's death was right there, in chains, facing justice. But Alexander's expression didn't change. No satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness. The trial lasted 3 more hours. Blake was found guilty on all counts: treason, murder, conspiracy against the crown. The sentence was death by hanging, to be carried out within the week. As the guards led Blake away, the Admiral's eyes found Alexander's across the courtroom. "Your brother died a hero," Blake said, his voice carrying through the sudden silence. "More than you'll ever be, Thornfield. You're just a weapon, a tool. You think this makes you righteous? You've destroyed more families than I ever did." 2 guards shoved Blake toward the exit, cutting off whatever else he might have said. The gallery slowly emptied. Elena made her way down to where Alexander still sat, staring at the now empty defendant's box. "Alexander." He didn't respond for a long moment. Then quietly, "I thought it would feel different." "What?" "Justice, revenge, whatever this is." He finally looked at her. "I spent 10 years hunting the man who killed my brother, and now that he's caught, sentenced to die, I feel nothing." Elena sat beside him. "Maybe that's not what this was really about." "What do you mean?" "You told me once you became the Wolf Duke because no one else was stopping the traitors. Because soldiers were dying." Elena chose her words carefully. "Maybe you weren't hunting revenge. Maybe you were trying to save the people who'd come after your brother. The sailors who'd die if you didn't stop Blake." Alexander was silent. "And you did stop him," Elena continued. You exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of naval command. You saved hundreds, maybe thousands, of lives. That's not nothing, Alexander. That's everything. He turned to face her fully. I used you, manipulated you, put you in danger to achieve this. Yes, you did. Elena held his gaze. And I chose to stay anyway, because some fights are worth the cost. Alexander's expression shifted fractionally. The cold mask he wore cracked just for a moment, and Elena saw the man beneath, exhausted, grieving, but maybe, finally, ready to stop carrying the weight alone. What happens now? He asked quietly. Elena touched the ring still on her finger, his mother's ring, worn through battles and bloodshed and desperate gambles. Now we decide if this engagement is still just a charade, or if it's become something real. The words hung between them, honest, terrifying. True. Alexander stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the first truly gentle gesture she'd ever seen from him. I don't know how to be anything except a weapon, Elena. Then I'll teach you, the same way you taught me to fight. She smiled. We'll figure it out. Together. Together, Alexander repeated. Then, even quieter. I'd like that. 6 months later, on the crisp autumn morning, Elena Whitmore stood in the same ballroom where everything had started. Ashford House had been transformed. White flowers everywhere. Musicians tuning instruments. Hundreds of candles waiting to be lit. But this time, Elena wasn't alone at the edge of the crowd, desperate and ruined. She stood at the altar in a gown of silver silk, her father at her side, watching Alexander Thornfield walk down the aisle toward her. He wore his military dress uniform, dark and severe, but softened by the small smile he couldn't quite hide when he saw her. The same man who'd danced with her when she was desperate, who'd used her as bait, who'd taught her to fight and kill and survive. The man she'd chosen to stand beside, even knowing exactly what he was. The Wolf Duke reached the altar and took her hands. You look beautiful, he said quietly. You look terrified, Elena replied. I am. Battlefields are easier than this. The priest began the ceremony. Elena barely heard the words. She was too focused on Alexander's face, the way the cold mask had softened over the past months, the way he looked at her now like she was something precious instead of a chess piece. They'd spent 6 months rebuilding. Her father's shipping business, restored and thriving. Alexander's investigation concluded with Blake's execution and the exposure of dozens of corrupt officials. Their engagement transformed from strategic necessity into genuine partnership. It hadn't been easy. Alexander still had nightmares about his brother. Elena still flinched at sudden movements. They were both too damaged, too broken by what they'd survived. But they were broken together. And somehow that made all the difference. Do you, Elena Margaret Whitmore, take this man? I do, Elena said before the priest could finish. Alexander's smile widened fractionally. And do you, Alexander James Thornfield? I do. The priest pronounced them married. Alexander kissed her, gentle and careful, like he was still learning how to be soft instead of sharp. The ballroom erupted in applause. Elena pulled back and looked at her husband, her partner, her ally, the man who'd helped her survive when survival seemed impossible. No regrets? Alexander asked quietly. Elena thought of everything they'd been through. The dance that started it all, the conspiracy that nearly killed them both, the desperate choices and bloodshed and moments of absolute terror. Then she looked at her father, standing in the front row with tears streaming down his face, at Mrs. Caldwell, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, at Captain Webb and Prosecutor Ashford, both grinning like fools, at the life she'd built from the ashes of the one Julian Mercer had tried to destroy. Not even one, she said. They walked back down the aisle together, no longer the Wolf Duke and the desperate merchant's daughter, just Alexander and Elena. Two survivors who'd found each other in the darkest moment and refused to let go. The reception lasted late into the night, dancing and champagne and speeches that made Elena blush and Alexander grimace. But when the last guest finally departed and they stood alone in Thornfield House's grand entrance, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Happy? Alexander asked, pulling her close. exhausted. But yes, happy. They climbed the stairs to their shared chambers, no longer separated by the fiction of chaperoned engagement. Alexander helped Elena out of her elaborate gown with careful fingers, still getting used to gentleness. "I have something for you," he said when she was down to her shift. He pulled a leather folder from his desk, the same kind that had held the forged documents so long ago. Elena's heart clenched. "Alexander, if this is another investigation, it's not." He handed it to her. "Open it." Inside was a ship's commission. The Elena Whitmore, registered to Whitmore Shipping Company. A merchant vessel built to Elena's father's exact specifications, ready to launch next month. "I bought it with part of the reward from exposing Blake's conspiracy," Alexander explained. "Your father helped design it. It's yours, to do whatever you want with." Elena stared at the commission, tears blurring her vision. Her father's business had been restored, yes, but this was new. A ship bearing her name, proof that she'd survived and rebuilt and become something more than the girl who'd been ruined by scandal. "Thank you," she whispered. Alexander pulled her into his arms. "You saved my life, Elena. Multiple times. This doesn't come close to repaying that debt." "We're partners. We don't keep score." "No, we don't." He kissed her forehead. "But I'm still going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Elena looked up at him, at the man who'd been forged into a weapon by grief and rage, who'd slowly learned to be human again through their partnership. "You already are," she said. That night, as rain drummed against Thornfield House's windows, Elena lay in her husband's arms and thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate dance in a glittering ballroom, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, battles fought in darkness and blood, justice won at terrible cost, and two broken people who'd learned to fit their jagged edges together. The Wolf Duke had finally found peace, and the merchant's daughter had found something stronger than revenge. She'd found a partner who would stand beside her through any storm, someone brave enough to dance with the most dangerous man in the room and stay when the music ended. Outside, London slept, unaware that two of its most unlikely heroes had just begun their next chapter, not as hunter and bait, not as investigator and pawn, but as equals, as partners, as husband and wife. The wolves had learned to hunt together, and anyone who threatened the kingdom they'd fought so hard to protect would learn exactly what that meant. Together, Alexander and Elena Thornfield were unstoppable. The conspiracy was broken, the traitors were dead or imprisoned, and the love that had grown from desperation and blood and impossible choices would endure, because some bonds, forged in fire and tempered by survival, were strong enough to last forever.